Hey there, this is Miss Cross. I am going to take you through your French and Indian War notes today, everyone who is absent. There are skeleton notes available in course materials for you to fill out using Kami or to print and fill in by hand. It's up to you. All of the information on the handout should be reflected on the slides, so feel free to pause the video as often as you need. I'm not going to be going slow enough for you to take notes, so I'm going to kind of just quickly go through the notes so maybe you can listen and then you can go back through and pause to fill in your notes. But feel free to use the video however makes sense for you. All right, let's get started. The French and Indian War is Unit 2, Section 3, and is a war between Britain and France. So the causes of the French and Indian War is claims in the Ohio River Valley. That land was occupied by different Native American tribes, primarily who were part of the Iroquois Confederacy. The British colonists are encroaching on that territory. Oops, I didn't do that, sorry. And the French also technically claim that territory as far as maps and land claims go. The Ohio River Valley is exceptionally valuable. It's very good land for farming. It has lucrative fur trade opportunities within it, and it has lots of navigable rivers, access to the Ohio and Mississippi River for trade and transportation. George Washington plays a role in the French and Indian War. At this time, he's only 22 years old and a colonel in the British Army. He was initially ordered to go into the Ohio River Valley and deliver a message to the French that they needed to leave, that the land was now going to be occupied and utilized by Britain. The French refused and built a massive fort, Fort Duquesne. George Washington was then ordered to return to the area and forcibly remove the French soldiers. In a conflict, the French ended up forcing George Washington to surrender after a third of his men were killed and wounded. So George Washington's first big job, kind of a failure. Ultimately, this war is going to give England, the British, us at the time, control of more land in North America. Both sides, the French and the British, got Native American allies, hence the name, the French and Indian War. It is against the French with the Indians on both sides for the title. Typically, Native American groups are going to ally with the colonists for tools, weapons, and other goods. The French primarily allied with the Algonquin and Huron, and the English eventually allied with the Iroquois League, who were originally going to be a neutral party, if maybe even leaning toward the French during the Albany Plan discussions, but eventually the English sort of convinced them to join their side. War erupts in 1754, but the turning point, which is the point of the war where it becomes clear that we will likely win, came when we capture the city of Quebec in present-day Canada in 1759. After that, the French are forced to begin peace discussions, and we have the Treaty of Paris in the year 1763. As the winner, we got land claims. So we got Canada and all of the French land east of the Mississippi River. France lost all of its land west of the Mississippi River, and that includes the port city of New Orleans, to Spain. Spain was a financial ally of Britain during the war. So Spain retained the great port city of New Orleans and all of the French land west of the Mississippi River. Britain gained all of the French land east of the Mississippi River. There's some division and unity as a result of the French and Indian War. First, let's talk about the division. We see further divisions between the British and American citizens. While in our side of the ocean, British troops tended to look down on the colonists, thought of themselves as superior British citizens. There was also lots of resistance and reluctance among colonists to help British soldiers. Colonial smugglers even continued to trade with France throughout the war, even though they were our technical enemy. However, on the flip side of that coin, the French and Indian War was also a unifier of the American colonies. A lot of intercolonial rivalries were broken down in the face of this common enemy, France. And we see the first signs of nationalism. After our victory, colonies were united in the fact that men had died all over the 13 colonies against that common enemy. Now we have a new Western frontier. All of that land between the Appalachian Mountains and the Mississippi River is new land that England or Britain now owns. Most colonial settlements had been made along the Atlantic coast, and so now our settlers or pioneers began to move west. Now, the Native Americans that occupied that land, that includes present day Tennessee, were united and led by Chief Pontiac, and they rebelled against those colonial settlers in the year 1763. To avoid conflict, King George III issued the Proclamation of 1763, which banned colonial settlement west of the Appalachian Mountains. He tried to keep that as an Indian reserve. And simply to avoid conflict, King George is still fighting with France in Europe. The French and Indian War is also known as the 7 Years' War in Europe, and on account of how it lasts 9 years, which makes no sense. However, King George simply doesn't have the time to deal with a Native American uprising over here in North America. So he issues this proclamation that's basically disallows the colonial settlers to move into the land they had just fought to acquire. And so naturally, that's upsetting. Take a look at this map real quick. I don't know if you can see my cursor. This is all of the yellow land that was French territory that was lost. Ohio River area was disputed. Pink area is British territory. Green is Spanish territory. So pre-war, France owned all of the territory on the map to the left. That's yellow. After the war, you can see how land changes. Britain acquires all of the land east of the Mississippi River, including the Ohio River Valley. Spain gets all of the land west of the Mississippi River, including the port city of New Orleans. And here, this red line on the right side of the map indicates the proclamation line that confines colonists east of that imaginary line. However, it is duly ignored. Americans are outraged by the proclamation line. They felt entitled to the land west of the Appalachian Mountains after colonial blood had been shed in the war. They feel like they had earned the opportunity to settle there. Therefore, the proclamation was ignored by most colonists. And for the British, it was nearly impossible to enforce. It's not like you can line up troops all along the Appalachian Mountain Range to keep colonists out. And so even after Britain attempted to ban colonials from moving west, people like Daniel Boone, pictured there to the right, continued to help colonists settle in the area west of the Appalachian Mountains. In your map on your notes, I do want you to shade those areas and color code them. So take a moment in Cami, or if you're printed, colored pencils, to create a key for British, French, and Spanish territory to show the land acquisition before and after the war. If you have any questions, please message me, and I will talk to you guys soon. Have a great weekend.